Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panmo TV and welcome to this, the Dune Watch Read Party. Yes, that's watching the film. That's the film of Dune. That's by David Lynch in 1984, who I had a DVD copy. I can't find it at the moment. And also the book, the 1965 book, Frank Herbert's book, Dune. And so that's basically what the purpose was. I started this particular watch party over a year ago, so now I think it's time to finish it. Behind me, you can see Charney and Paul. This is, of course, I must point out that we're talking here, when it comes to Dune, specifically about the 1984 adaptation by David Lynch. Forget the Denis Villeneuve new one. As you know, I've watched the first part, I reviewed it, and I thought it was mediocre. It's definitely an inferior adaptation to the David Lynch one. So we're going to focus on the David Lynch one in terms of this adaptation and the original book. So just a bit of trivia. Charney, you see there over that shoulder, this shoulder, is played by Mary Sean Young, who is rather red-pilled. If you know what she talks about these days, she's very into the conspiratorial world. So good for her, I say. So Dune it's an unusual book. I mean, I'm not going to go through the introduction of it because I did a special introduction. I did a special introduction video, like I always do in these watch read parties, to give you the basics of the publication history and the technical side of the publication, and indeed the video as well, the film as well. It has been a notoriously difficult book to adapt, and there's been several attempts that got stuck in development hell. But the book itself is quite unusual. It was published in 1965 by the author Frank Herbert. Also co-wrote the script with Lynch in 1984, and now Frank Herbert wrote another book which I've got a copy of it, and I haven't read it yet. I had a copy since I was a little kid. It's called Dragon of the Sea. It's another science fiction story written in 1957. I haven't read it yet. I've got to read that. But this particular film, Dune, came out in 1965. And as you know, it's been very, very influential indeed. And it's been very, very popular. It's one of the best-selling science fiction stories of all time. Now, several things make this quite unique. One, first of all, is that when you read it, there's several things spring to mind. It has a sense of realism, and one of the sense of realism is, or what allows you to get into the adaptation of it. It's kind of told. It's a story within a story. By that I mean is that there are several anecdotal and kind of epigraphical features, which make it sound a little bit like it's something that was written in the setting of the story, which would normally this would be sort of like fourth wall broken bits of information. They actually are within the story. By that I mean, for example, every single chapter begins with an epigraph by Princess Irulan, one of the characters. Now, she doesn't actually come into the story till the very end, but as you see here, she's done it. Every single chapter starts with a little kind of narrative by this epigraph here by Princess Irulan, from a book called The Manual of Muad'Dib by Princess Irulan, and she's got another one called In My Father's House. So Princess Irulan, who is Princess Royal of the Empire, of the Galactic Empire, is also an author, and her various books are included in this. So it's very interesting. She has a book called My Father's House. There's several things about Paul, who, well, she marries at the end. This is the only time she comes into it, but here we are. This is a poem by her, you see, at the beginning of this chapter here. Do You Wrestle with Dreams? Dirge for Jameis on the Funeral Plain. Songs by Muad'Dib by Princess Irulan. There you go. And at the end, there's an appendix, but the appendix is, again, written within the kind of story. So, for example, the first appendix it says appendices, and you expect some sort of note by the author. It's not. It is by the author, of course, but it's called the Appendix 1, The Ecology of Dune, by Pardot Kynes, first planetologist of Arrakis. So basically, it's written as the appendices are like a part of the story. That's one unusual aspect of it. It's also in what you might call what's known as the super person, which is very unusual. A super person perspective. I mean, I'm sure you know about narrative perspectives in fiction. So, for example, there's a first person. If something's written in the first person, the narrative takes the first person. It's written I am me. It's I and me. So, in other words, the character is essentially the narrator of the story. One of the characters is the narrator of the story. There's many, many stories like that. I don't like writing in first-person narrative personally. I use third-person narrative. Third-person narrative is when there is a series of characters that are all he and she, and the narrator is outside the story. I think that's the most common form of in literature. Usually there's what happens is the way I like to write is I have a central character, but I always write them in the third person. So, for example, for Roswell Rising, my central character is Clayne Quilly, and everything revolves around him, and he is the main. He is essentially the only character whose thoughts I describe. I think that's a good way of defining a narration and a narrative character or central character. They describe their thoughts, and so Clayne is the only one who you can essentially the reader can know what he's thinking. All the other characters are like also third person, but they're he and she, but they're secondary characters. Of course, in Roswell Revealed, that switches to his daughter Siobhan, and in Roswell Redeemed, it switches to his son Brendan, who was actually born during Roswell Rising. So that's how it works. Dune is very true. Dune has a superpositional narration, and what I mean is that it takes getting used to, actually, if you're not used to it, but all the characters essentially are first-person narrators, and it switches from one to the other. Not within now. There's nothing wrong with having a story. For example, my novel Rockall is a third-person narrative, but every chapter has a different central character. This was something that I used that because I was. This is a method commonly used by Kim Stanley Robinson, who's a science fiction author I very much like, and that inspired me to do the same with Rockall, my second novel. The thing about having a first-person or third-person narrator is, while you're in that particular narrative, you can't describe thoughts of other people, and also it makes it very obtrusive to do so. And also you can't show it's very difficult or obtrusive to show the reader anything that's outside the perception of that first or third person narrator. In this particular story, it's a super person. So in other words, there's every single chapter all the time it switches continuously from one narrator to another. Now, it's not quite as chaotic as Robert Anton Wilson and the Illuminatus trilogy. He makes a point of breaking all those rules, Wilson, in that brilliant book. He does it so well, where the narrative is constantly switching from one first person, then it goes to a third person. One character's in the third, then the first, etc., etc. One moment it's Howard the Dolphin, then it's Hagbard Celine, and one moment Howard is third person, then he's first person, etc. The superposition in this is a lot more organized, but it does switch from one to the other. And what's more, you see their thoughts. The thoughts are written in italics. So it says here, indeed, the Baron said, and he thought, it's only just. We're the ones who tamed Arrakis. Okay. That's Baron Harkonnen. He goes from his voice, then immediately you see what he's thinking in italics. It's written in italics, you see there, see. That's the bit. Where's the bit? That's the bit I just read there. You see. That's actually reproduced in the Lynch film. What you do is you hear the voice of the character whispered in the background where their lips aren't moving. That's their thoughts. And so Lynch does that, and Lynch manages to achieve that. I'm not sure he does it. I'm not sure it's really very well done. It's possibly something he should have left out, but he tries. He tries to reproduce that effect. So this is like it's been called a science fiction story. I wouldn't actually describe it as that. I'd say it's more kind of space opera, futuristic space opera with science fictional elements. Rather like Star Wars. I'd say the same for Star Wars. Star Wars is not really science fiction. And it's told in a very, very I'd say it's very vivid. As I should point out that I've tried to do the same with going back to Rockall briefly. I tried to do the same with Rockall. I tried to do this. What I did with Rockall was I included several interludes, which were included references to books such as Empire, Reborn, and Eyewitness on Rockall. This is a book that doesn't exist, but within the scope of the story, somebody wrote it. So I tried to do a similar thing to Frank Herbert here. And what Irulan, a role Irulan also plays, Princess Irulan, is you get the feeling she's a character within the story and narrator. And indeed, in the film, she has like little narrative segments at the beginning. In that way, she's a bit like Edison's daughter in the Tesla movie. Do you remember the Tesla movie that I reviewed? A very good film. You see her briefly. I mean, she's in the story, and in the Tesla film, you see him playing tennis with her father, looking sympathetically at Nikola Tesla. But it's very similar to that. But it is a space opera. It fits within a universe. In a sense, it's a story within a universe which has its own history and geography that is bigger than the story. It's rather like Tolkien and Middle-earth. Tolkien, when he designed Middle-earth, he designed it and created it in far more scope and detail than was necessary for the story. In fact, he has there's little sort of essays on history of Middle-earth, which refers to the War of the Ring. The War of the Ring is the historical event within the Lord of the Rings franchise, which just covers that particular, which is basically it's the period of history and the event in the history of Middle-earth which is described in the books. It's as if the books Lord of the Rings themselves are simply a brief historical kind of fictionalization of that one part of Lord of the Rings of the Middle-earth history. And Dune is similar. Dune is set in the distant future when after in a post-terrestrial humanity, when we've sort of moved into the world beyond, into space, and we're flying through space, and Dune is orbiting another star. Some people claim it's the star Canopus. It doesn't actually specify in the story in this particular book. I've only read one, though. The Dune book novel is actually the first of a series. I've not read any of the others. I think Herbert penned about 5 of them, and then his son wrote another 8. And there's a new one called the Butlerian Jihad, which has just come out. So the franchise is continuing today. It is still at work today. So this is set in a universe which is very large, very detailed. And Herbert has gone to a lot of thought of designing this imaginary futuristic world of space. And this is very different, though, I'd say this is very different to, so I'm just ticking off things on my notes. It's very, very different, I would say, to most other stories set in that particular time period. For example, in the 60s, when in 60s science fiction, there was almost established, I'd say, that futuristic scenarios are all very high tech, visibly high tech. For to begin with, there were computers everywhere that did anything. There were robots, and everyone had this vision of the future of enormous, very obvious advanced technology. That was one thing. You see this in Star Trek. Another thing you see in Star Trek, which I think is which again makes it quite conventional in that sense, is that it's very left wing. It has a very left wing view of the future. That is, that society would continue to continue being very, very. It would continue on its progression of being very, very liberal and very, very socialist. So what I mean by that is that the trend towards, for example, the social justice, which I confess was a necessary thing at the time. That is because the various countries, including the United States, where Frank lived, the author, had gone through periods where, for example, there were no more segregation rules for black people, things like this. And there was more and more acceptance of homosexuality. Homosexuality was being decriminalized in many, many countries. Women were given equal property rights in various countries, things like that. And there was always a sense that would continue forward into the future. They projected into the future, into a world where essentially we live in some kind of anarcho-communist paradise. Which, let's see, Star Trek is pretty much like that, isn't it? the crew of the Enterprise wear egalitarian uniforms. They're men and women in equal numbers. There's lots of non-white people, and there's it's almost like the world has come together. In the Star Trek, for example, the crew is very, very cosmopolitan. I mean, not only do they have an alien from the planet Vulcan, but they have a black Swahili-speaking woman running the communications. They have a Japanese and a Russian guy at the helm. Sulu and Chekhov. This was in living memory of Pearl Harbor and World War II, and in the middle of the Cold War. And of course, a Scottish guy in the engines. And you're gonna give me warp speed, no, Captain. Things like that. So you have like a global conglomeration of different nationalities and races, including extraterrestrial races. And there's no talk about money, and it doesn't seem to any private property, things like that. Now, Dune is very different. Dune has a very different vision of the future as well, which is much more right wing. Actually, it's even though there is high technology to begin with, even though it is high technology, there is high technology. It's very limited, and it is in a particular kind. What I mean by that is, it's not. You don't see what looks like what we would call sophisticated computers. You see metallic, riveted, chunky things. So it's, in a sense, it has a slightly steampunk feel. Remember, I'm talking specifically about the Lynch film, and the book. It's the way it's described in the book. So it has this steampunk look to it. The reason for that is there's actually a reason. I mean, you may call it a plot device because Herbert wanted to make his story like that. I don't know, but what happened was in the Dune universe, several centuries earlier, there was an instant in which artificial intelligence became so sophisticated that it tried to take over the universe. As a result, there was a war. There was a war right across the galaxy between humans and artificially intelligent machines. This was known as the Butlerian Jihad, which humans won. And when they won it, they passed a law saying never again would they build any electronics that was sophisticated enough to threaten the dominance of humanity. Now, that doesn't mean there's no electronics at all. There are. For example, the doctors have X-ray machines, things like that. And I mean, in the Villeneuve, you see that the ornithopters have simple analog speedometers and things like that. So yeah, so there is technology, but it's different. It's more steampunk. It's quite simple when it comes to space travel. That's where the spice fits in. I'll talk about the spice in a minute. But I think it is maybe a bit of a plot device because it's pretty clear Herbert likes the sort of sword and sorcery type fantasy stories, because this is like that. And indeed Star Wars has this element too with the lightsabers. He likes the sword and sorcery type Robert E. Howard type fantasy, and indeed there is another plot device, I think, which maybe together with the Butlerian Jihad gives him that ability to produce that kind of world, and that is these body shields. I can't what they call it. It's called the Hertzfeld effect or something, which means that people actually can create a form of body armor. It appears around them in these animated sort of boxes that appear around them, around their bodies. It's generated from a machine on their belt, and it creates this electronic body armor, which projectiles can't penetrate. And even these other things called las guns, they have these things called las guns, which they're essentially directed energy weapons like the phasers in Star Trek with limited use. They can't pass through these body shields, which means we've had to go back to using swords and knives and things. They got these Chris knives, which are like daggers. It's all really, it seems to be quite exactly what you want. If you wanted to write a futuristic story of spaceships, but you wanted to make it like full of, sword fights, this is what you would do. This is exactly the plot device you would create. Now, it has this, like Star Wars, it has this spiritual element. Now, I know Gary Robinson knows a lot about this, and because he works within the industry. But I know I told him I said in the introduction this had inspired George Lucas. I mean, maybe it did. He says maybe it didn't. Quite possibly, but I can see similarities between this and Star Wars. I definitely can. And on the subject of politics and the sociology. I mentioned the Star Wars. I mentioned the left-wing element to Star Wars, and Star Trek, and indeed most science fiction of the era, the 1960s. However, the society you see in the Dune universe is not like that. In fact, I'd say it's quite anachronistic. It's actually much more like this socially. It's much more like the Middle Ages in Europe, which then fits in with the whole sword and sorcery thing, doesn't it? It's based under a series of fiefs. It's a feudal system, not a post-national communist system. It's the opposite. It's very hierarchical. There are a series of fiefdoms, and which are ruled by aristocratic houses. The House Atreides, House Harkonnen, primarily, which are the main rivals in this particular story, who are led by aristocrats who have aristocratic titles: Duke, Baron, etc. And they all have these various aristocratic titles, and indeed they are subordinate not to a nation state or to a sort of communist federation. They are subordinate to an empire called the Galactic Emperor. So again, that's very different to Star Wars, where you have like the Terran Federation and Starfleet and things like that. Funny enough, it's really weird because I was listening to Stefan Molyneux. I was listening to Stefan Molyneux the other day, and he was talking about Dune, and he said that everyone he knew, when he was at school, he knew people who read Dune. And he said, "Oh, they were all druggies. They were all druggies. All the people who read Dune were into drugs." And I mean, maybe there was a psychedelic element to this, and indeed, I think Herbert took various psilocybin and things like that. So there's an element to that, maybe. And he asked questions like, "Well, what did the worms eat then when they couldn't get like Fremen?" Well, that's actually explained within the story, but the worms apparently start off as very small, and because there's evidence Arrakis is completely dry. I mean, the Fremen, of course, as you know, are storing water in giants, because they planned, when they take over the planet, they plan to terraform it, turn it into a wetter planet. But they're storing this water in underground chambers, but there's no water on the surface. It's a desert planet. Not one drop of rain falls on Arrakis, they said. So, but the worms actually were originally like fish in an earlier period of Arrakis. There was actually an ocean there, so it was like Mars. It used to be wetter and warmer. Mars used to be warmer. Dune is very hot. It's very hot there indeed. But the presence of water water has a special sort of weight. It has a kind of like mystical element to it, water, and something like I noticed when I went to the Contact in the Desert. I told you I thought that the place names sounded almost, you could almost feel the moisture in the place names, as if they were a celebration of water, like Indian Wells, Desert Sea, Indian Wells, Indian Springs, Desert Well, Indian Wells, Palm Springs, etc. And there are water cellars in the Dune. These are not described in the film, but the water cellar goes around going suk suk suk, and there's a kind of like almost a culture associated with water sails in there. Some people describe this as as almost, some people have interpreted it as anti-aristocratic. I don't know how they do that, because there are depictions of the difference between wealth and poverty, especially in the book. There's a time when Fade Rother, for example, he of course is he's the nephew of Vladimir Harkonnen. At one point, he wins a fight in the arena, in this gladiatorial arena, and he's portrayed as so popular that he'll be a welcome guest in the poorest house in the poor areas of wherever it is, Gidi Prime, or wherever it is. And that implies there is resentment between the rich and poor. There's this class tension, which you got, of course, in medieval Europe, and indeed it still exists today to a certain extent. So could it be that they are kind of... Could it be that he's just put... I think Frank Herbert put that in there just to illustrate how medieval it is, how feudal the whole system is. I don't think it's I don't think it's really designed it's not like Dickensian. It's not designed to illustrate the plight of the poor in horrible ways, in all kinds of like very, very extreme ways. I don't think that's true. Now, several recurring themes. Poison spikes. He seems to. Another thing everyone you find again and again in the story is poison spikes and poison darts. A lot of people use poison in fighting. Indeed, in the very the exciting fight at the end between Paul and Fade Rotha. Fade cheats by using poisoned spikes attached to his belt, which he hurls at Paul. Yeah, so you see that again and again. There's grandmother Gaius, what's her name, Grand Mistress Gaius of the Bene Gesserit. She holds a poison spike against Paul's neck when she's testing him. Things like that. Yeah. It's essentially it's a very messianic story. It's apocalyptic, and as you know, I'm into the apocalyptic. I've done an entire video called Apocalypse, which of course was banned from YouTube, as you know. It's only on Alt Tech now, but it is an apocalyptic story. It's about massive transformation, as you know. It's about at the end. I mean, there will be spoilers here, but at the end there's a kind of a messianic element. Paul, who is the Shadrach, that is the Fremen Messiah in their legend. They have like a prophecy that there will be a Messiah that will lead them into freedom, and indeed they eventually raid the headquarters of the Harkonnens and depose them, and then Paul becomes emperor. Which is very. It's a hero's journey. It's also very apocalyptic. He is the Messiah. There are some other interesting elements as well. There's these, there is technology that's there, and it seems to be very specialized technology. For example, I mentioned the body shields. There's also still suits. Now, still suits are. It's pretty disgusting, really. They're designed to recycle your body's water, so this saves water. You wear this still suit, which is like a big wetsuit, really. I mean, how they avoid overheating, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any cooling elements to it. But it's in the desert climate, in the hot desert climate. What happens is you sweat, and the moisture from your sweat is caught in these catch pockets, which are these. You see them in the film as these sort of like big containers. These bubbles, these pillows and cushions all over the suit, and you suck them up through a straw, basically. And there's a thing they put in their nose. You see it in the film, which you said, remember to breathe out through your nose, because then that takes the moisture out of your breath. So if you go, how you breathe out like through your mouth, eventually you will end up being losing all the moisture of your body. So you have to wear these still suits, and the Fremen still suits apparently are the best, although where they make them, and that's never revealed. But there are these still suits. Now, in the the characters in the film are bareheaded, which I suppose would make sense so they could be seen by the viewer. In the book, there's a head covering as well, which is a bit like an Arab headdress. And there are a lot of similarities between the setting of the story and the Middle East. It's very much I think it's really very much based on the Middle East. And there's also, along with the head covering, you have I think there's something that covers your entire face, like a koof mask. You rub your hands are bare, but you rub them with these things from the ink vine, or not the ink vine. The creosote bush, yeah. You rub some sap from the creosote bush into your hands like that, and it's an antiperspirant. It stops your hands sweating. There's also a lot of other interesting elements as well. I mean, there's a sort of element, and indeed this is something I'd actually thought when I watched it more recently, and I found out it's true, that one of the inspirations for this was the story of Lawrence of Arabia. Now, for those of you who don't know, during World War I, Britain attempted to undermine the Ottoman Empire, that is the Turks, who were the allies of Germany in the war, by leading the Arabs to revolt against Arabs of the Levant and the Saudi Peninsula to revolt against their Ottoman rulers. And this was led by a guy called T.E. Lawrence. There was a very famous film made about that. And there are similarities to that in the sense that Lawrence went native among the people and he sort of led them. Like, in a sense, they're like the Fremen and the Ottomans are like the Harkonnens. That's the kind of point he's making. So there are similarities there, definitely. Another medieval type element to this is the guilds. There are lots of guilds in this and various organizations. There are lots of organizations actually which are similar to the Middle Ages. So, for example, there's a spacing guild. Now, this is where they have these giant, I think they're called highliners, these giant spaceships which allow you to fold space. And folding space is basically warp. You know, like you get in Star Trek, it warps space so you can travel vast distances without it taking thousands of years because you can break the speed of light. It's like a wormhole thing. But to do that, in order to warp space, you need spice. You need the spice melange, definitely. Melange means mixture in French. I'm not sure why, because there's a lot of Frank Herbert did include a lot of foreign language words in his story. So, for example, there's Yitzhak Shadrach, I think, is Hebrew. Bene Gesserit is actually Latin. I forgot what it means, but it's actually part of a Latin sentence. And there's a lot of Arabic in it. You know, just Shai Hulud, the worms. These are all Arabic words. In fact, the Fremen language is based on Arabic, and their religion is called Zen Sunni. So it's similar to Islam, and they have Ramadan. I remember they celebrate Ramadan. So there's lots of guilds and organizations and orders of various kinds. I think there's how many languages does he use? Hang on a sec, because he uses there's lots of different languages in Dune. Whoops. Am I still recording? Hope so. I should be. My browser just did something strange there. No, it's still working. But there's various different words that they use. Yeah, there's a canley. Canley is a word for what they call a duel, which is the canley is what Paul and Fade do at the end. There's several Ukrainian words, Sich and Tabir, which are the Sich is the Fremen community. That's actually Ukrainian, and there's several other kind of weird words that they use. Let's see some of the names. Peter de Vries, that is actually Frisian, which is not a very well known language. Actually, it's spoken in the northwestern Netherlands and also spoken part of Germany as well. And there's Harkonnen. Now Harkonnen sounds a bit Finnish. I remember there's several different thoughts about where it comes from. Apparently, he saw it in a phone book, old Frank Herbert, and he thought it sounded like Russian, but it's actually Finnish. But he thought it sounded sinister. Some people say Finnish. Finnish sounds like a sinister language, you know. But there's all kinds of different. There's what do they call that thing? The Ratascan. They call the universe. They call it the Ratascan, which is what's it called? I can't remember. But that's an Afrikaans word anyway. I forgot the name of it. The Ratascan, I think they call it. So it was a couple of months ago I actually read this. But anyway, there's several different words in foreign languages in this particular story. Now, the Bene Gesserits are interesting because they're like they're sort of proto-feminists in one way. They're obsessed with women. They're all female, and they're a kind of spiritual order that has developed sort of supernatural abilities such as mind control. They can use their special voice. They go like that, and it makes anyone do whatever they want. And the Bene Gesserits they've sworn only to have girls as children and never boys. And in fact, Jessica, who's a Bene Gesserit, she's the concubine of Duke Leto. And again, concubine is a very medieval thing. A concubine is a partner that you have, which when you can't enter into a normal marriage for whatever reason, you have a it's called, that person's called a concubine. So it's kind of it's almost like kind of, I suppose you maybe call it a civil partnership. I don't know, but it's a partner you have, which is not officially a wife, but it's still your partner, and you can have children with a concubine, things like that. But Jessica is the concubine of Duke Leto and Paul's mother. It turns out later he was related to the Harkonnens, I think. At some point, they found out he was actually related to the Harkonnens, but that was sort of kept secret. And he's Feyd-Rautha's cousin or something like that. But they have paranormal powers. For example, they said they can manipulate. They have like telekinetic powers to a certain extent, and the ability to control minds. They're also undergoing a eugenics program involving creating a race of superwomen. So, when what starts Paul off on his hero's journey is that Jessica has to explain to grandmother Gaius, to Grand Mistress Gaius, played very well by Sian Phillips in the Lynch movie. As I said, less said about the Villeneuve one, the better. She's very angry because Jessica had a son, because Leto wanted a son. So she was split between her loyalties to the Bene Gesserits and to her husband and the House Atreides. So they can control the sex of their infants, the Bene Gesserits. And this was on Caladan. Caladan is like the opposite to Arrakis. It's like an ocean world. It's more like the Earth. It's mostly ocean. And that's where House Atreides is. It's a much more pleasant place, I must say. And so Paul has to undergo this rite of passage, a very dangerous rite of passage. I'll describe that in a minute. But yeah, Caladan is a very nice place. And Giedi Prime is not described in much detail, but it's where House Harkonnen come from. And Vladimir Harkonnen, in the leader of the Harkonnens, he's the Baron. He's a loathsome individual. He's fat. He's so fat he has to have anti-gravity devices attached to his body so he can even move. And he's like covered in skin lesions, and he's just the ultimate sort of slob. He's just overweight, dirty guy with skin diseases, and he's cruel. He's horrible. He's a disgusting, he's a pederast. He preys on little boys sexually, and indeed he in the film. I mean, this is often cut out of some of the cuts of Dune. Don't have this in because it's so horrible. He kills one of them because his catamites all have like a heart plug, a device attached to their heart which you can pull out, and then they bleed to death. And he does that. Now, apparently, Feyd tries to kill. In one scene in the book, Feyd-Rautha tries to kill Vladimir by concealing a poison spike just under the skin of one of his catamites. Yeah, he's great. He's a great villain for that reason, because a good villain must be despicable, and he is. As I said in the Villeneuve movie, as I said during my review of it, it lacks that. The Villeneuve movie, the Harkonnens in the Villeneuve movie kind of look like bald bikers, really. Leather-clad kind of Hell's Angel type characters. There's none of the horror and revulsion that you get in the Lynch movie. Now, spice is, of course, there is a drug there's like a designer drug that's recently come about in our world called spice, which has caused a lot of problems. It's named after this. Spice is a drug. It's a commodity that grows apparently some kind of fungus on Arrakis, and only on Arrakis and nowhere else, which is why the politics of Arrakis is so complicated and so crucial. It's rather like the Middle East today with the oil. Obviously, because Middle East has so much oil, it has this geopolitical pivotal nature, which is why there's always wars there and things like that. Now, Arrakis is similar, and maybe this is what Herbert wanted to illustrate, because during the 60s there were lots of coup d'etats and things like that going on in the Middle East, engineered by the CIA, creating a lot of the regimes in Syria and places like that, which today are still preserved by the globalists for the necessity of the oil industry. And spice plays a similar role to oil, because without spice, there's no long-distance space travel at all. basically in the galactic without spice, the galactic transport system totally breaks down. Which is why it's not safe. It's not safe. It's quite difficult because it's a dangerous thing to mine the spice, because the spice miners are constantly threatened by these worms, the giant worms. There's the harsh climate, things like that. But spice is also a drug. It's a drug that mutates the body. It causes various changes. I mean, but most obviously, it causes your eyes to turn bright blue. Now, in the book, it's much more extreme than in the film. Your entire cornea and iris turn blue. But at the same time, it increases your lifespan and vitality. It gives you kind of super soldier like powers. It also gives psychic powers in varying amounts to certain people. Paul, for example, he starts to experience visions when he's out in the desert and he's exposed to the spice. He breathes it in. But it's also necessary for folding space. For in a mechanism not quite explained, it's essential for the fuel of the interstellar spacecraft, and it only grows on Arrakis. Now, the withdrawal effects are fatal from it. I mean, it will kill you. You'll die once you start taking it. If you ever try to come off it, there's no rehab clinic you can check into. You die basically. But the thing is that you're also trapped. It's like a lot of these Fountain of Youth stories, because if you take it, you get extra long life, but eventually it turns you into, the mutation goes so far, you turn into this fish-like creature, and the spacing guilds are they're these kind of like intelligent fish almost, and they're hardly human at all. Yeah. There are mentats as well. Now, after the Butlerians you had, some people try to get around the rule of not having supercomputers by breeding human beings with computer-like brains. And mentats, they say know a mentat by his cherry-stained lips. And they have like red marks around their lips. It's best illustrated by Thufir Hawat. Now, Thufir Hawat is the mentat, the state mentat of the Atreides. He's later captured by the Harkonnens, but he's played by Freddie Jones. Now, just going through here. Some people suggest it's eco-fiction. I don't know. See, because like Frank Herbert was very into ecology. He actually worked for a charity that was trying to repair sort of dust bowl conditions in parts of Oregon, USA, and according to the literature about him, that kind of inspired him a little bit. And he met a couple of the Amerindians, several Indian chiefs, and that apparently got him it got him interested in various elements to do with conservation. Indeed, lots of Amerindians are very keen on conservation. They are very keen on conservation. But anyway, what happens in this is that the emperor decides that the Duke Leto, who his home planet is Caladan, has to go to Arrakis to take over from the Harkonnens, because it's the only source of the spice melange. It's very important, and the emperor wants Duke Leto to go there. This is just a basic of the plot now. It's just a basic story of the plot. But unknown to him, Landsrad. That is the word, Landsrad. Landsrad it's an Afrikaans word, but it's again foreign language, and it is it's the name they give to the empire. But the emperor is actually worried that Duke Leto might actually replace him as the emperor of the galaxy. So what he's actually doing is he's laying out a trap for Leto. Duke Leto is played very well by Jürgen Prochnow in the movie. He was actually in this thing called Das Boot, a German U-boat movie. I remember him well. A German actor. Leto sort of knows this is probably going to happen, but see, he goes there with his son Paul and his wife Lady Jessica, who is Yes, very alluring she is too. What's the name of the actress? Francesca Annis. Yes, hot as chestnuts, man. She is. Really is. In the Lynch, man. Her voice is just, she's got this gorgeous voice because she's French, I think. And nothing makes me feel more horny than listening to a woman speaking French. Ooh. um, and of course, she's in trouble with the Bene Gesserits because she's had a son. And Paul is you know, Paul is much loved by his father, and he's the heir apparent to the duchy to the duchy to House Atreides, and so he will become ruler of Caladan and Arrakis anyway. And he's a down to earth young chap. I mean, Lynch cast Kyle MacLachlan in this, and he was very good actually. He was only, I think he was like 17 or something when he was in this, playing a young man, maybe a couple of years older. And Lynch was very impressed with MacLachlan. In fact, as is often the case with Lynch, he reuses a lot of his actors. He often will include the same cast in all his productions, and so of course he took MacLachlan as part of his series Twin Peaks, which is very, very good in itself. And there he plays this Agent Cooper, who's an FBI investigator. Again, he was quite young at the time, but he was playing someone maybe 10 years older. So MacLachlan plays Paul. And he's down to earth, though. He has a friend called Duncan, who is like a quite a normal kind of commoner. He's a pilot he's a space pilot, and his other friend is Gurney, who is he's his like warfare trainer, his martial arts trainer. There's this famous scene where they have this fight with the body shields, and he walks in, and he says, "Oh," and Gurney then attacks it. He says, "I don't want to." I don't want to do this now, Gurney. And then Gurney then attacks him. It's a bit like Kato and Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther movies, you know. And so obviously the Atreides are the good guys. It's obviously Atreides are the good guys. But then Grandmother Gaius, sort of Reverend Mother Gaius, then turns up, and she eventually has a compromise with Jessica. She said she'll let it go, but Paul has to go through a rite of passage, a very deadly, dangerous ordeal. She forces him to put his hand into a box, which uses electronic nerve induction to create terrible pain without causing any damage, but it causes terrible, terrible pain. It's equivalent of having your hand burning, you know. And she places this poison spike again. Against poison spikes come up again and again and again against his neck. It's necks and poison spikes. These come up all the time. And if he pulls his hand out, she's going to put the spike into his neck. And Jessica is absolutely terrified, thinking she's going to lose him. But it turns out he passes. And it's always thought that only women can do this because of childbirth, I suppose. Again, the feminists will love this. But Paul passes. And so he essentially becomes the first male Bene Gesserit. Ooh. And so basically, the whole Atreides family traveled to Arrakis, and which is now his fiefdom, although the Harkonnens are still at large because the Harkonnens are secretly supported by the Emperor. Because, as I said, the Emperor is worried that Duke Leto will actually become Emperor and succeed him in his line. And so so soon after they arrive, indeed, the Harkonnens attack. There's an attempt to kill Paul as well by a guy hiding behind a wall. He hides behind a wall for like 2 weeks, and there's this levitating robot dart with poison again, which comes out and tries to attack Paul. It's a very good scene, actually. And so then the Harkonnens attack with the help of the Emperor. And it turns out there's a spy in their midst. It's Dr. Yui. And what happens is Yui drugs Duke Leto and takes him to Harkonnen. To the Harkonnens, and this is seen as a horrible portrayal. And as Jessica says, 1,000 deaths are not enough for Yui. But now it's not really discussed so much. It's not really revealed so much in the film, but in the book you find out he's doing this under duress, What's happened is that the Harkonnens have his wife Wanna as prisoner, and they will torture and kill her unless he does what he says. So Yui basically, but see, Yui has done a double bluff. He's betrayed Vladimir as well. What he does is he pulls out one of Leto's teeth and replaces it with a poison gas, a bomb of some kind. And he says, what you got to do is bite on it and then breathe into the Baron's face. But what happens is the Baron unfortunately has a protective shield up, and so when the gas bomb explodes in the Duke's mouth, it kills everyone else, but it doesn't kill the Baron. I suppose it would be a less interesting story if that happened. At the same time, Paul and Jessica, they hijack. They're being taken away by the Harkonnens to be killed in the desert. To be just left in the desert to be killed in Ornithopter, this aircraft, which has these bird-like wings, and they hijack it. At first, Jessica offers to allow the Harkonnens to shag her, basically, if she'll let Paul go, to sacrifice herself for Paul. But in the end, Paul uses his Bene Gesserit powers to get there, because they've got a gag over. They put a gag over Jessica's mouth. They know she used this mind control voice, but they don't know that Paul can do it too. So Paul uses the mind control voice to get Jessica to remove the gag, and because she can do the mind control voice much better, once then she can just hijack the Ornithopter, and they eventually get out into the desert. Yeah. And then once they're there, that's when they come across the Fremen. And they realize that they're more. Suddenly they realize these Fremen. The Fremen are sworn enemies of the Harkonnens, but they're quite pleased that the Atreides have arrived. And so Paul and Jessica then go native with the Fremen. And Jessica becomes a kind of shaman, because she drinks this. I think it's the blood of the sandworm, or some substance excreted by the sandworm, water of life it's called, which causes her to become some kind of shaman. And so she's now senior within the Bene Gesserits, because the Bene Gesserits and the shamans of the Fremen are kind of the same. But she's now carrying a baby, which is Paul's sister Alia, who also has those powers too. Paul then meets Chani, who he sees previously in a vision. Chani is this beautiful Fremen woman. And played by, I say, Mary Sean Young, as you know. And then after a while, Paul's eyes turn blue, and he becomes the complete sort of like leader of the Fremen. He becomes their Yitzhak Shadrach. And they call him Muad'Dib, which is what they call it's like a kind of rodent that lives on Arrakis, and it's one of the moons of Arrakis has this symbol in the lunar seas on its surface, and the Maria of its surface. So it's like this, the pattern of the lines on the moon, in the same way our moon has like patches on it. The Maria and the Terai, their moon doesn't. It's in the shape of this mouse they call Muad'Dib. And so eventually they find Gurney. Gurney survives. They find him again, and then they basically they then attack Arrakeen, the capital of Arrakis, where the Harkonnens are ruling again. And they do it by riding on these giant sandworms. I mean, the sandworms are like these enormous creatures, and the question is, what do they eat when they can't get a Fremen? It's explained in the story that they feed on something underground. They go deep under the sand, and then they come up, and they're attracted to vibration, and especially regular vibration. You can attract one with the thumper. You have this thing going, this machine that makes thumping noise, and then they turn up. Now you can actually tame them to a certain extent. What they do is they have these like scales, and you pull one of the scales up with this like, it's almost like a kind of like a jemmy, this tool, and it's and that then the worm gets worried because it's worried that sand will get inside underneath the plate and irritate it. So it rolls over, and when it rolls over, you can grab hold of it. And as long as you hold this, this thing up with this tool, with this jemmy like tool, you hold the plate up. It won't go under the sand. It'll stay above the sand, so it doesn't get sand underneath which irritates it a lot if it gets sand underneath the plate. So you can actually ride these sandworms. You can ride them almost like horses, or gigantic horses. And so they attack Arrakeen and basically kill all the Harkonnens. Thufir Hawat he's been given like some kind. It's a bit like the spy. She's given this thing which he has to take every day. This reminds you of David Icke and the man. Do you remember David Icke, the man with the shampoo sachet on his chest? He has this plastic see-through shampoo sachet. What happens is the Harkonnens are given Thufir this drug that he has to take every day or he'll die. And at one point, he chooses to. He says, "I'm not going to do it anymore," and dies. Poor old Thufir. And then the Emperor turns up to try and sort it out, and there's this confrontation with Paul. In the film, he shouts down the old bag, Bene Gesserit bag, which is nice. Oh, Mother Gaius, he shouts down the old bag. Yeah. And so what happens is that he then has a fight with Feyd-Rautha. They have this. He has to go through this duel, this Canley with Feyd-Rautha, and as you say, Feyd tries to cheat with poison, again with poison spikes, but Paul succeeds in killing him, even though he's an ace fighter. Like he fights in the arena, as I said earlier. He fights in the arena on Giedi Prime, and he's very, very popular because he wins this amazing fight, and even the poorest family in all of Giedi Prime would welcome him. And at that point, when he's done that, he can then become emperor, and the emperor has to succeed the throne. But this is where it gets, again, this gets very medieval here. I don't think you would have this in the modern world, certainly not in the world of Star Trek. He is in love with Chani. Chani and he are a couple, and they have like a kid. They have this, they have a child together, and he's named it after his father, Leto. But that's the only time you see Princess Irulan in the entire story. She's described as a blonde beauty, and but he says in order to cede the throne to Paul has to marry Princess Irulan. And there's this weird scene. It's at the very end of the book. At the very end of the book, he just has to say to Chani, look, he says Paul saw his mother. Chani says, I know the reasons. It must be Usul. Usul is just her name for him. Means the base of a pillar. Paul heard the secret tears in her voice and touched her cheek. Chani, you need fear nothing ever. You will negotiate for me, mother. And Chani by your side. She has wisdom and sharp eyes, and it's wisely. And she says, and then eventually what happens at the end is Jessica says to Chani, this is the very end of the book, think of it, Chani, the princess will have a name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives. So in the end, she's basically just saying to Chani, look, I'm in a similar situation to you. I was a concubine too. I couldn't marry properly my husband, even though I loved him and we had children. Therefore, but this is the difficult destiny we have to face. It's our duty, and that's at the very end. Now, as I said, there are many sequels to this which I've never read. There's many sequels to this particular story which I've never read. But I get the feeling this is, and I have glanced at some of the, I've glanced at some of the fan posts on various fandom websites. Apparently, Chani, understandably, is rather put out by that, and she does seek to reassert herself within within her husband's life, within her lover's life. Because even though Princess Irulan is really beautiful, I mean, she's described as being very beautiful. Indeed, her actress in what's the name of the actress? Virginia Madsen, who's hot as chestnuts. She, he marries her, but he doesn't really love her. He loves Chani, but he gives it up to marry Princess Irulan in order to become emperor and save the universe. And again, this is very medieval. This happened an awful in history. Within history, we know many examples of people in history who've done this. I mean, one very, very recent example is Prince Charles, or now King Charles. He wanted to marry Camilla when he first met her in, I think, 1972. And the family said, well, no, you can't do that. And in this day and age, you can't have concubines. So he had to give up, for his royal duty, he gave up Camilla and married Diana, a woman he didn't love, and she didn't love him. So this does happen certainly in the medieval world, and indeed in some modern aristocratic systems and monarchies. Just going through my notes here again. There's a slight difference in the gas attack. It's between the book, differences between the book and the film. The gas attack by Leto with the help of Yui is different. He kills, the gas just blows out in one direction into one person's face, and he thinks he's doing it for Vladimir. He actually does it to Peter de Vries, the Mentat, kills him instead. That's the end, and there's not that many differences apart from that. The book, I think, is just more detailed. It's just a lot more detail in it. As I said, the less said about the Villeneuve, the better. But generally speaking, it's the Lynch adaptation is very faithful to the original story, I'd say. Indeed, it was the script was co-written by Frank Herbert, so you'd expect that. So please do go out and get this. It was published by Chiltern Books, which was actually it was actually a publisher that specializes in non-fiction, car user guides and DIY and things like that. So they published this fictional book, and it's, obviously there's been several new editions. This one is by Science. Where's the publisher? That's so there's no imprint on the back. It's unusual for a book. Victor Gallant. Oh, it's a Victor Gallant. Of course, Victor Gallant is the main. Is one big British sci-fi publisher. But look, they got a map of the whole planet as well there. That's the North Pole there. Yeah. So I would say read the book, watch the movie. I do that rather than forget the bloody Lynch adaptations. At least I haven't seen the second one, so I don't know what it's like. But the first one wasn't very good, so I'd stick with the David Lynch one. I say forget the Villeneuve one. Forget the Villeneuve adaptation. Stick to the Lynch one. Read the book. And I think the next stage is for us to reconvene for the live stream. So, as I said, that's the final part of this watch read party. I'm assuming by now you will have all either read the book and or watched the DVD. I hope. So that will come very, very soon. Oh, by the way, if you want to know where I've been for the last week, I'll show you. Here we go. Yes, I have. Well, Ben, you've been away for a while, haven't you? Yes, I have. I've been away all this week attending the trial of Richard D. Hall, and if you want to know about it, it's all on her Panwo Voice. I have done a day by day, day 1, 2, 3, 4, blow by blow account of everything that goes on there, so that the alternative media has its say as well as the mainstream media. So please do go and check that out. So I'll see you soon in the next video, which will be, I don't know what I've got in the plan next, but the live stream, obviously the live stream for this particular video will be very, very soon. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Will my arm disappear? Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.